Okay. Yeah, so this is the scripture that I chose. Pretty good. Uh, yeah, so anyways, I'll read the first part and then we'll talk about it. So um, Paul is writing to Timothy. Paul's in prison. You guys know the gist. You've read the book. He says, "You, however, have followed my teaching, my conduct, my aim of life, my faith, my patience, with love, steadfastness, my persecutions and sufferings that happened to me at Antioch, at Iconium, at Lystra, which persecutions I endured." And we'll look at that for a second. Um, First, I want to point out that the word followed. The word followed is actually two words. One of them is like another Greek word for follow, and another one is the word para, which means like from beside or to the proximity with. So Paul is saying that Timothy has followed like closely behind Paul, like super closely, and sort of these in the Greek, this was like pretty common. These teachers would have students, and the students would like get pretty competitive with one another. I think Ben was talking about this a lot in his teaching, which I pulled it off of. But but yeah, so the pupils would imitate the teachers. So they would imitate them in what they said, in their clothing, and sometimes even in the way they walked. And it was really competitive. There'd be like rivalries, but the point is that in the same way that pupils imitated their teachers here, you see that Paul, or so that Timothy is imitating Paul, and Paul goes on to describe how he's imitating Paul. He talks about how, the teaching. Can you guys see? You just see the highlight? Nice. Okay. It's the teaching,
Yeah.
um, the conduct, and the word conduct is like a manner of life. So the mode of living, their way of living, and his aim of life. So like his plan is to preach the gospel. Pretty straightforward. And then Timothy goes on to even uh, imitate his faith, so his religion. What he is taught is his faith, and even like his character traits, like his patience, his love, and his steadfastness. Now, what's interesting is that Paul brings up two things. He brings up let me change the color so that we get three colors going. He brings up persecutions and sufferings, and this kind of stands out from the typical teacher student relationship. You don't want to get a student and bring them into suffering. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense from an honor standpoint of trying to like be have the most honor. Suffering is not very cool unless you're an ascensionist. Um, and he mentions three locations: Antioch, Iconium, and Lystra. And when I read this, I was like, what are these locations? I don't remember this. So I went to Acts, and Acts told me the answers I needed. Now, during Paul's first missionary journey, he went to those three locations, and he went to Antioch first. And at Antioch, he preached the gospel, but the Jews were filled with jealousy, and they contradicted what Paul said, and they ended up kicking him out of the city. And so then Paul naturally he moves on and he goes to the next city, Iconium, but things aren't that much better for him at Iconium. Actually, they like are getting worse. Here at Iconium, the Jews stir up the the Gentiles again, and they decide to stone Paul. But Paul hears about this, and he runs away. Last but not least, he goes to Lystra, and here at Lystra, he ends up healing a crippled man, and the people are like, "Heck yeah, this guy's sick." But they decide that they're gods. He's with Barnabas at this point, and so they want to sacrifice things to him. This is like not going Paul's way at all. He's a god here. He's trying to bring the revelation of God to him, not himself be a god. And things are a mess. And what makes it even worse is that the Jews from these two last locations, they come. Oh, dude, I'm totally gonna get. Oh yeah, they come and they go to Lystra, and here at Lystra, they uh, they stone Paul. This time they stone him, and they think that he's dead, so they drag him out of the city. but then something crazy happens. He either is resurrected or he is like not dead, but he ends up walking away. So what's interesting is that Timothy is not with Paul. Timothy's nowhere in the picture. So why is Paul bringing up like this point at all? Well, because Paul goes on and he goes to another town called Derbe. And after that, he sort of does more stuff, and then he goes back to Lystra, and he goes back to his old town, his old places, and he meets Timothy here. He meets him at Lystra, and he asks Timothy to join Paul. And when he asks this question, Timothy would have been there at Lystra. He would have heard about the Jews coming from Antioch and from Iconium, and he would have seen what happened to Paul at Lystra. He would have known what kind of persecutions and what kind of suffering Paul was going to face in his life. He would have seen this all. And so his incentive for following Paul is not that much. If he accepts Paul's call, then he also is going to say that, I'm going to put myself up to that same fate that Paul has, the same stoning, the same being hated by everyone. And it's crazy because he said yes. And you can see that Paul agrees that through all of this, Timothy has, followed him. He's followed everything he taught, everything that he has emotionally, and all the suffering that he's been through. Timothy knew his risks, but he decided it was worth it. And so, but Paul doesn't end there. He goes on and he makes a promise to Timothy. And his promise is not very positive either. He says, "You suffered for me, and now guess what? Everyone's gonna suffer for God. Actually, it's a promise that you will suffer for me. This is not you're not an exception. This is the facts." Um, and so the crazy thing is that throughout this all, wait, sorry, I'm a little bit lost. Yeah, so then Paul kind of gives another command to Timothy. He says, um, continue in what you have learned and what you have firmly believed. Paul wants Timothy to continue in these sufferings and continue in these persecutions. The same way he's calling back to Timothy when he met him at Lystra, and he's calling back and he's saying, when you followed me in my persecutions and sufferings before, I want you to do that again. And actually, I want this to be a life, and this is never really going to end. And Timothy could have been passive. He could have, everyone has an option. He could have not wanted to follow. Um, hey, you got some roommates joining me. He could have. He didn't have to, follow Paul into this persecution and suffering. Um, but instead, well, we don't know what happens, but assumingly he did. And I think often it's really easy to be passive and to be like, I don't want this suffering and I don't want this persecution. I know in my own life, back at home, back when I lived at home in high school, I I succumbed really easily to peer pressure. Whenever I hung with my friends and they were you know, doing something that as a Christian I shouldn't have approved of, or I shouldn't have participated in, I often chose the passive route because I saw the suffering and I saw the persecution that I would get if I professed what I believed, and I ran away from it. And this book really challenged me, when I'm going back to that place, when I'm going back, I need to do what Timothy did. And I need to see the two choices that I have in life, the choice to follow in teaching, in faith, in patience, in persecution and in suffering, and the choice to be passive. And the question is which one are you going to do? And so I think we need to strive to be like Timothy and to 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 go and to be ready to suffer, even if it causes pain and it causes loneliness. Um, yeah, I think that's what I want to challenge you all to do today. So yeah, that's it.
Heck yeah!